Hello Year 11, this is the second video focusing on paper 2 question 5. In our previous video we looked at what sort of things you should be including in order to be having a convincing and compelling argument and making sure that you're trying to get as close to the 24 marks out of 24 marks out of 24 possible on the content. This video is going to be focusing not on the remaining 16 marks because that is on spelling, punctuation and grammar, but more focusing on how to actually go about planning your answer for this. Because remember, you should be spending about 10 minutes at the start of your time on this question out of the 45 planning. So just so we're really clear, again, what is this question? You'll be told there's a particular form that you need to write in. And so as part of your planning, you need to make sure that you have an understanding for that. Secondly, you'll be given a statement that you need to argue for or against. You can argue on both sides, but you must come down on one side stronger than the other. This isn't RE, don't sit on both sides. Don't sit on the fence for this. And then as we said there, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you get lots from it to make sure that you are doing planning. It is much better to spend more time planning in this question than just starting writing, because this isn't wasting time. We see so often that if students haven't planned, they just start writing. There is no coherence, there's no structure to what they're saying, and ultimately they end up scoring lower marks. So I suggest your planning takes this approach. When you get to the exam, you have the statement that looks like this. And I suggest the first thing you do is you need to do 3 spider diagrams. Your first spider diagram is what does it mean by the word famous, or whatever the topic might be. If it's about cars and pollution, what is meant by pollution? Give examples and anecdotes you could refer to. That could be from personal experience that you've had with a celebrity. It could be your favorite celebrity, or you could be an example of a celebrity that you think is incredibly stupid and pointless and should not be famous, like the Kardashians, for example. Think about the more specific examples you can use, the better. Just mind mapping some ideas. The second brainstorm is actually just how do you feel about the statement? Think about which ideas you agree with and what you might disagree with. Remember, you don't need to come up with either or. You could just fully disagree with it, but you've got to come up with precise arguments for it. Don't just say, I agree with it, full stop. Why do you agree with it? Why do you disagree with it? If you're struggling, one thing to always think about is the worst case scenario with this question. If this continued, whatever it is, what would be the worst thing that could happen? For example, in this question, the worst case scenario could be we might end up with a generation of young people, if they only just want to be YouTubers and only want to be successful like the Kardashians, then they're actually not going to get any skills and they're all going to fail and they're all going to be unhappy and unsuccessful. A really extreme example, but that's how extreme you can go. It's not about what you're arguing in this question, it's about how you are arguing it. And the third bullet point is just brainstorm to do, is just simply phrases to remind yourself to tick off as you're going through. So is it a letter to your friend? Is it a letter to the head teacher? In this case, a letter to the local newspaper. So should you be more formal or informal? If you need to write down in this interrogative, declarative, exclamative, imperative, just almost like a tick sheet, that's a good thing to be able to do. So making sure that these planning just gives you a sense about the starting point. It's almost just kind of like vomiting on the page for a couple of minutes to get some of your basic ideas out, because then what we need to do is actually prioritize and sort out our structure. Because this is the recommended structure that we would state. It's really important, if we want to aim for those higher marks for this, that we have a compelling and convincing argument. The idea that it amplifies as it continues. Now, amplifying in musical terms is something that gets louder. And if we think about amplifying in terms of writing, your argument should get stronger as you go through. So rather than it just being my best argument, then through to my worst argument, that isn't an effective thing. Start with a somewhat weaker argument and build to your strongest one. And here is a recommended structure that we suggest you take. You should do a brief introduction, regardless as to whether you're writing a letter, a blog, or a speech. An introduction of just a couple of sentences introducing the topic. Good to use interrogatives at this point, rhetorical questions. and an example of an anecdote. Now, an anecdote is like a short personal or a short story, just a couple of sentences long. This can be completely made up. This could be a worst case scenario, but it's something that immediately hooks the reader in and gives you the opportunity to use lots of descriptive writing as well. Your first paragraph will be your first argument, which will be reasonably strong. It shouldn't be a weak argument. None of your arguments, I'm sure, will be weak, but it shouldn't be your best argument. So what I suggest you do is you do your brainstorm on the question first of all, and then you label it with a number 1 next to it. And it's good in this paragraph to be using lots of declaratives, statements that you are wanting to state. Second paragraph should be a slightly stronger argument. So you should label it as number 2 on your spider diagram. Good lose in this one, lots of declaratives, now starting to use some interrogatives again as well, trying to put in those rhetorical questions, forcing the reader with that. A third paragraph should be your climax here. This should be your strongest argument. And you should label it as the third one in your spider diagram that you've got. This one should use lots of imperatives and possibly exclamatives as well to show that you've built up to the most important point. And then you need a closing statement. Link it back to your opening, whether you're using the same interrogative in the start as you do at the end. That's a really nice, what we call cyclical structure, if you want to do that. But rather than just having the same question at the start and the end, answer the question. So for example, at the start, if you said, do you think it's appropriate for teenagers to aspire to be YouTubers? You could put that at the opening sentence, put that exact same interrogative at the end, but then answer it. Do you think it is appropriate for teenagers to aspire to be YouTubers? Absolutely not. So therefore, you've structured all your arguments, you've put all that good ideas, you've amplified it together and built up. End with a strong declarative, stating your argument to really finish that off in a good way. So we would suggest a minimum of 5 paragraphs for this. If you end up running really low on time, you must make sure that you definitely have your introduction, you definitely have you definitely have your climax, and then a closing statement. So paragraph 2 is the one to lose if you have to lose anything, because we want to make sure that way you introduce the topic and then it amplifies at least a little. So if you want to pause the video now, just to write down any of your ideas for this, you might want to go back to the previous slide as well, the previous couple of slides, to actually start planning some ideas, bringing some ideas down based on what we've got there. And these are the sorts of example sentence starters you could use with this structure. So we've got exactly the same structures we had in the previous slide, but here are some sentence starters. These are not the only sentence starters that you should use. This is not to say that your paragraph 1 would only be 2 sentences long, but as it's pointing you in the right direction to use the sorts of questions. As an example, we're saying introducing it with an anecdote here. A great way to start an anecdote is by using the phrase picture the scene with a colon after it, showing variety in that punctuation, using that correctly as well. And then look at this as an example anecdote. An innocent child sidles up to his parents one day and says, "Mummy, when I grow up, I want to be a YouTuber. Don't let this happen." Really short anecdote, didn't really happen, but you've got that sort of language there, the adjective innocent, showing your opinion about what this really is, but ending it with that imperative, that exclamative you've got at the end there, really showcases your opinion without saying I agree or I disagree with this statement, because that is what you want to avoid. You don't want to be saying in this question, I agree or I disagree. You want to be giving us a little bit more of a holistic understanding. And then, as we talked about previously, so let's think back to our innocent child. What this does really nicely is it links up your introduction and your closing statements to create that cyclical structure. So therefore, I'm not expecting you in every single example that you write to talk about an innocent child, but you should be trying to use potentially this. Picture the scene to open, short anecdote, do your wonderful paragraphs in between, and then, so let's think back to, and then you're really building and showing that strength and coherency of that argument as well. I suggest you pause the video here just to be able to put down some ideas for this, note down any particular sentence starters you like the look of. So let's have a look at an example answer here for the question that we focus on. Remember, we are asking to write a letter about do we think that famous people should be just those who deserve it or otherwise? Pause the video now. And what I would like you to do is highlight for me any things in particular that you think should be improved about this start to an answer. So this answer can be celebrated in a number of ways because it ultimately does answer the question and it is using its paragraphs. But apart from that, I think there's little that's compelling and convincing about this. First and foremost, yes, we do need to make sure we have, because it's a letter, we need to start it with dear, so well done here. But ultimately, we need to start at dear sir or madam. Never start at dear newspaper editor. It just shows you don't understand how to actually start a formal letter. This, as an opening sentence, again, nothing wrong with it in terms of helping you answer the question, but it's boring. This is not convincing. This is not compelling. Write me an interesting opening involving an anecdote or an interrogative. It's much better to show that you are implying the opinion rather than you saying exactly what you're going to do. This is not interesting. If an examiner has to read 100 letters and they have to read this 95 times, yours will stand out if you start it with the phrase, picture the scene with a colon next to it. No way should the word basically be ever coming into your answer, because nothing you're going to be arguing is basic. That's the sort of thing that we unfortunately slipped into our vernacular that we use every day, but it shouldn't go into your writing. Other things to avoid, you need to avoid acronyms like LOL. You shouldn't be putting those in, and you really should be avoiding putting slashes in your answer as well. It is fundamentally lazy and it is too informal in terms of its writing. So I pause the video now. Make sure you're going to avoid doing these things and think about how you might go about improving this answer. So let's go back to the very start then. This is your question that you've got. And what I would like you to do, based on the slides that we've had, is put together a formal plan for this question. In the previous video, we got you to put together some imperatives, interrogatives, exclamatives, and declaratives all the way through for this question, as well as thinking about some ideas of logos, pathos, and ethos. But now, how might you formulate those into a formal plan? The more you're doing that, the better your planning will be and the quicker your planning will be, but also it's much more likely that you're going to be looking towards those top level answers because your writing will be compelling and convincing. So I suggest now what you do is you look at the plan that you've got, put it all together, pass that plan on to your teacher for them to be able to check through your ideas, and then have a go at writing things up fully. Everything that we've done here, in the exam, we should be trying to do it in about 10 minutes. So the more practice you take doing planning, the quicker it will become, and the quicker you'll see some patterns and things emerging in the sort of writing that you're wanting to include in that. Best of luck with it. I hope you found this video useful.